Good evening.
Good evening. This is Loreto.
Welcome, everyone. We're delighted. Keep eating if you're in the room. And if you're on Zoom, we want to welcome you as well. We had 70 people registered to be on Zoom. And our Spanish interpreters will take over on Zoom for whomever needs interpretation. One thing to know is that this event will be recorded. So if you're on Zoom and don't wish to have your name included, take your name off. But otherwise, we just want to let everyone know this is what we call a homegrown hybrid event. We're experimenting with all of our technology to make everything work for everyone. So we're very excited about it. Back to eating in this room, and the interpreters will explain everything on Zoom.
Hola, buenas tardes. Soy Loreto. Estoy aquí con mi compañera Esther y hoy seremos sus intérpretes aquí en Zoom. Hello, good evening. This is Loreto. I am here with my colleague Esther, and we will be your interpreters this evening. Vamos a repasar unas pautas para que la interpretación funcione de la mejor manera posible. We're going to review some guidelines so that the Zoom interpretation can work in the best way possible. Primero, muchas gracias por invitarnos a crear este espacio bilingüe con ustedes. First, thank you so much for inviting us to create this bilingual space with all of you here on Zoom today. Les recordamos que todo lo que ustedes digan para las intérpretes es confidencial. Les pedimos a las personas que hablen una a la vez para poder interpretar, o sea, un micrófono a la vez. Les pedimos que hablen a un ritmo moderado y cerca del micrófono. Y si hace falta que hablen más lento, más fuerte o más cerca del micrófono, se lo dejaremos saber probablemente en el chat. We'd like to remind you that for us interpreters, everything that you share today for us interpreters is confidential. We ask everyone to use one mic. That means one person speak at a time. We also ask you to speak at a moderate pace and near your microphone. And if we need you to speak slower or louder or closer to the mic, we'll let you know probably in the chat. También les queremos recordar que pueden hacer sus comentarios y sus preguntas en el idioma que deseen, en inglés, y trataremos de traducir el chat en lo mejor posible. We also want to remind you to comment and ask questions in Spanish or English, and we will try to translate all of the chat messages. Si están conectados por su Chromebook, es muy importante. Okay, voy a tratar de hablar fuerte. I'll try to speak louder. Si está conectado por un Chromebook, es importante que se una desde el navegador, así que si está en un Chromebook, para acceder a la interpretación, tiene que salir y unirse por el navegador. If you are connected here on a Chromebook, you need to join from your browser, so please leave the meeting if you're in a Chromebook and come back on a browser. Si está conectado por un celular, por favor encuentre los 3 puntitos en la pantalla del celular y de ahí encuentre interpretación de idiomas. Escoja el idioma que quiera escuchar, en este caso inglés o español, y haga clic en finalizado. Si no hace clic en finalizado, la interpretación no va a funcionar. If you're connecting from a cell phone or a tablet, please find the 3 dots on your screen, either top or to the side. Then click on language interpretation and choose your language for today, in this case, English or Spanish, and then click done. If you do not click done, the interpretation will not start for you on your cell phone or tablet. Si está en una computadora, por favor encuentre el icono del globito en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Si no lo ve, simplemente expanda la pantalla de Zoom y le aparecerá. Y de ahí puede escoger español o inglés para el día de hoy. If you're on your computer or desktop or Chromebook browser, find the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see it, just make your Zoom window larger and it should appear. And then click your language for today, in this case, English or Spanish, so that you can hear the interpretation. Ahora vamos a hacer una prueba en los dos canales de en inglés y español. Now we're going to test the channels, English and Spanish. We will start with Spanish. Vamos a comenzar con español. Le voy a pedir a mi compañera Esther que por favor diga unas palabras en el canal de español ahora. Muy bien, gracias. Si no escuchaste a Esther en español, por favor, déjanos saber ahora para ayudarte. Ok, parece que español funciona bien. Now we're going to test the English channel. I'm going to ask my colleague Esther to say a few words in the English channel so that we can test it. Go ahead. Thank you so much, Esther. If you did not hear Esther on the English channel just now, please let us know so that we can troubleshoot together. Okay, we don't have any questions right now. It seems that everything is working, so we Zoom interpreters are all set. Nadie tiene did not hear English. Okay, Sarah, can you tell us what device you're on? Okay, so please make sure that you are connecting from the device correctly. So if you are on a cell or tablet, you want to find the three dots on your device, click on the globe icon, and then choose English, and then click done. And if you are on a computer or laptop, find the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. This should also work from the browser. You want to find the globe interpretation icon and choose English.
Now it looks like I'm going to get English, hopefully. Thank you.
Okay, let's try again. Esther, can you say a few words again on the English channel? Thank you, Esther. Did anyone not hear Esther this time? Okay, we seem to be good. Anyone having issues with the English channel? Okay, so it seems everything is working. We Zoom interpreters are ready. If folks have any questions for interpretation, please let us know in the chat. Si tiene cualquier pregunta con la interpretación en español, por favor, déjenos saber en el chat. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. This is Loreto for the English channel on an iPad. You want to look for the 3 dots on your screen, and if you tap on that, the interpretation icon should come up for you. And then you click English, and then you click Done.
Here now? It is gonna come up when they're ready. Oh. That I thought. All right.
I thought they were gonna sit like as a pan.
So
Just one at a time.
Yeah, because when Dion is gonna be up in 25 minutes, they wanted to.
No, you're right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Good. There you go. Good evening again. And welcome everyone to our very, very first, as I said before, hybrid, homegrown, technologically advanced and exciting bilingual program. Where I want to tell everyone that we have 2 sets of interpreters. We have Loreto Ansaldo and Esther Luque on Zoom, and Laura Chavez and Brendan Levy here in the back of the room. And so if anyone needs interpretation, please let us know. Wave your hands and we will make sure you get it. We want to say a few special thank yous to the Cambridge Women's Commission, our primary co-sponsor and collaborator for this event. The Citywide Senior Center, which has set up all of this for us. And Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui, one of our hosts who will be speaking in a moment. And Mass Peace Action for being our technological setup people. They have been incredible. We have co-sponsors listed in the program, so please check them out. And so I'm Nancy Ryan. I am a founding member of the Cambridge San Jose Las Flores Sister City Committee. We've been working together with our sister community and the social movements in El Salvador for 37 years. So louder? Not loud. Okay. And now I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jennifer Ochoa.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. How are you? My name is Jennifer Ochoa, and I am a social worker for the Somerville Public Schools. It's really an honor to be invited to co-host this event. Thank you, Sarah. Just a little bit about me. I'm the daughter of Salvadorian immigrants. My parents had to leave their country because of the disastrous war in the 80s and 90s. And I really pride myself in those identities as a Latina, as a daughter of immigrants, as a first-generation college student, graduate. Again, I serve as a social worker in the Somerville Public Schools and the Somerville Family Learning Collaborative, and I've been in the district for 5 years, primarily working with immigrant families, many of whom are Salvadorian, and it's really a great honor to be able to do that work. I think, advocacy and pursuing social justice for our Salvadoran community is important. Because these families, and particularly children, which is a lot of my focus, are really truly our future. I would be remiss if not to mention that the role that particularly women play in this work towards social justice and advocacy, often we can have a skewed understanding of what advocacy may look like. But I have been witness to the advocacy efforts of many women, mostly mothers, in regards to their children and the families and the dual roles they often play. I believe that we all hold a role and responsibility in creating a better world for our future generations as their children and families learn, grow, and develop transnationally. So now I think we can move on to the next person. Thank you.
Always good to know. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our mayor, Sumbul Siddiqui, who has been a strong supporter of this project before she was mayor and throughout her mayoralty. And we're thrilled that she has become so familiar with our work that she has understood how important 37 years of a sistering relationship is in terms of building deep relationships. So without further ado, Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui. So we need to hold on to this little one as well.
Thank you, Nancy. It's so great to be here. I also want to acknowledge my colleague on the school committee who I love serving with, Member Aisha Wilson. It's amazing to work, as this previous speaker mentioned, women, working with women like Aisha and many others for our city is a true honor and a privilege. And I'm very happy to be here today. I want to thank all the organizers. I think back at the last 3 years, all the challenges, all the pain, all the loss. You know, we haven't been able to gather like this. There wasn't much traveling happening. And I think it's really amazing that this trip happened. I wish I could have been on it. I hope to go in the future. But when I look at all the sister city relationships in the city, we have a few strong ones. And this one, it stands out. It really, truly does. And so to the individuals who've just kept it going for 37 years, that's older than me. I know, I'm so bad. I shouldn't have made that joke, but whatever. It's very special. So really, I think this is something that the city is very proud of. I want to acknowledge the high school students from Ringe. Aisha and I are both alums. We're so glad you got to take part, so give it up. And it's really also important that we're here with Somerville, right? And we're sister cities. And it's really important we learn from each other and help each other as much as we can. So thank you for having me here. I am really just so proud that our city does this, with Las Flores and with our El Salvador and community, and it's really beautiful. So thank you for having me, and please count on me if I can ever be of service. I do want to also acknowledge Kimberly, our head of Women's Commission. We do a lot of events with the Women's Commission. It's one of the best commissions. And so it's great to always be doing these types of events with you. So thank you all. Hi to everyone on wherever the camera is. And it's on me. Okay, great. Hi everyone. We'll give it back to Nancy. Thanks so much.
A request for the people on Zoom. If you would kindly sign into the chat and tell us where you're signing in from. We'd just like to know where you're zooming in. And we have a few special people that we wanted to acknowledge. Marta Benavides is a Salvadoran woman who is a huge force in the ecological justice movement in El Salvador. We've met with her and she is on Zoom with us. We are thrilled. We also have Ana Peña, who is the former Consul General, thank you, from El Salvador. Edwin Argueta, one of the longest term members of our project, Salvadoran man who does not give up. He is working really, really hard, especially in the situation in El Salvador. Sonny Robinson and Jean Gallo are long-term supporters of justice in El Salvador, as well as justice in Latin America, and we're delighted to have them. And finally, I just wanted to mention that Peter Nataren is with us here. Peter is a leader in the Santa Marta community, and he'll be speaking tomorrow, and there's a little reference to it in your program, and there's a flyer on the table about the water justice folks who have been jailed in El Salvador for their work. So just wanted to do that. And now I will turn it back to Jennifer to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Nancy. So our next speaker to start off our program is going to be Diana Cera Becerra. Will speak tonight about the making of revolutionary feminism in El Salvador. She is a popular educator, a historian, and assistant professor at UMass Amherst. As a former undocumented immigrant and survivor of domestic violence, she is committed to building powerful movements. She has used her popular education training to organize workers and local and national labor organizations, such as the Pioneer Valley Workers Center and the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Her book manuscript, tentatively titled Insurgent Butterflies, tells the story of how women in El Salvador shaped the theory and practice of the revolutionary left. Welcome, Diana.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you all. Buenas tardes. My name is Diana Sierra Becerra, and I want to thank the Sister City. Did you hear me?
I'm sure it's on. Yeah.
I thank the Sister City committee and all of the compañeras who put this event together. I know that there's so much of a labor of love into these events. And I also want to thank you all for those of you who have dedicated, years and decades of your life to anti-imperialism. My work as a historian is, I think, a very spiritual one. Sure.
I think the interpreters.
Yeah.
It's just, I think this one's a little bit louder. Sorry.
No, no problem.
This is the sisterhood at work.
No, language justice is important. Could we have the presentation up while we do this? Hello. Hola. Is that better? Okay, awesome. Great. What I was saying is I just want to thank all of you who have dedicated your life and decades of your life to anti-imperialist politics. It's a really beautiful legacy that you transmit to younger generations. And I teach college students and high school students, and I know that it's a tradition that deeply inspires them. So today I'm going to be talking about the history of revolutionary women in El Salvador, the dreams and their struggles for building a world without oppression and exploitation. So today I'll mainly talk about the period of the 1980s, but I want to talk about women's political participation in earlier decades. So I want to tell you the story of Rosa. You can go to the next slide. So Rosa was born in 1954, and as a young girl, she and other farm workers worked on coffee plantations, earning less than 75 cents a day. And landowners forced campesinas to sleep under coffee plants, serve them rotten food, and sexually abuse the women and girls. And since the late 1800s, landowners had concentrated their power. And they had a military alliance. The landowning elite had an alliance with the military to maintain their power. And as you know, dictatorships ruled the country throughout the 20th century. So in the 1970s, when Rosa was just a teenager, she began secretly meeting in the mountains to read the Bible. And farm workers wanted to understand the poverty that marked their own lives. And they wanted to build heaven on earth. They did not want to wait till after they had died to access abundance. And this religious practice was known as liberation theology. And in 1975, when Rosa was just a young girl, she joined the Union for Farm Workers, or La Unión de Trabajadores del Campo, UTC. The union confronted the horrendous workplace conditions, demanding higher pay and equal wages for women. And the union also denounced the sexual violence that took place on the plantations. And as you all know, in response, the military unleashed horrific state violence, murdering, torturing, and raping labor organizers. And in response, women like Rosa increased the militancy of their tactics. She led land occupations. She went to prison to demand the release of her comrades. And she and others burned crops to the ground to attack the profits of landowners. Next slide, please. So by the late 1970s, state and death squad violence was claiming 800 lives a month in a country of a comparable size to the state of Massachusetts. So systemic state violence, electoral fraud, pushes young women like Rosa to seriously consider the strategy of armed struggle. And in 1980, the National Guard murdered both of Rosa's parents and several of her family members. We can go to the next slide. Domitila was Rosa's neighbor. When she was 22 years old, when she was 14, she joined the Farm Worker Union with Rosa. But seeing the military slaughter of her friends, of her family, pushed her to train in the militias. So every night when she was in her early 20s, for months, Domitila would tiptoe past her sleeping parents and walk into the mountains. And upon being discovered, her father repeatedly beat her and called her horrible names. He assumed that Domitila was sleeping around, and he was resentful that Domitila was neglecting her domestic responsibilities. And despite the beatings, Domitila refused to tell her parents what she was doing at night. And her father finally stopped beating her when he found a revolver hidden underneath her pillow. She had acquired that revolver training in the militias that were preparing for the coming insurgency. So to attend a union meeting, to attend a nighttime militia training, young women like Domitila had to withdraw their domestic labor. And this generated conflicts with husbands, with fathers, and other male relatives who felt entitled to police the labor, the bodies, and the mobilities of women. So in other words, to participate in the class struggle, women had to confront sexism in the home. And that is an important part of the story that often gets overlooked. We can go to the next slide. So Domitila and Rosa allied themselves with teachers. Teachers in El Salvador were the largest sector of public workers, and a workforce mainly composed of women, 80% women. And in response to poor wages and to sexual harassment, teachers built one of the largest labor associations in the country, the National Association of Salvadoran Educators, or Andes 21 de Junio. When I asked women teachers what a dignity meant, because that was their slogan, for the dignification of the teacher, they told me it was so that their supervisors would stop harassing them. Because when a woman would speak up about workplace conditions, she would be transferred. And if she wanted to have a job, she was often sexually harassed to get the job. So for these women, dignity meant a workplace free of sexual harassment. And one of those women who led the fight, you see her on the screen, Melida Anaya Montes. She became the general secretary in the early 1970s. And under her leadership, teachers organized massive strikes against their state employer, who was the military. And in the process, they radicalized thousands of people, and they built a successful coalition between teachers, farm workers, students, and other workers. And this strategic alliance between peasants and workers would be foundational for the success of the insurgency that was to come. And teachers, united with campesinas, built the second most combative labor movement in Latin America. And again, that would not have been possible without the labor of women. So women like Melida and Domitila see how this military is murdering their friends and family members for demanding the most basic of rights. And they wanted the military to stop this military slaughter. They wanted to stop seeing corpses dumped on the side of the road. They wanted to stop seeing people stuffed into coffee sacks. So Domitila and Melida joined the largest guerrilla organization, the Popular Liberation Forces, las FPL, and Melida would become the second in command. Next slide, please. So in 1980, the FPL joins 4 other guerrilla groups to form a united front called the Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional. And as you know, the FMLN took up arms to overthrow the US-backed dictatorship. And this was a historic moment because women were absolutely crucial to the success of the FMLN. Conservative estimates, they were 30% of combatants, 34% of the political cadre, meaning the medics, the popular educators, the organizers, and 80% of civilian supporters were women. We can go to the next slide. So I want to tell you some of the stories of how guerrilleras, combatant women, confronted sexism in the guerrilla camps. They had to confront sexism in their everyday lives, these everyday conflicts about food, about sex, about menstruation. In the guerrilla camps, they had to answer basic questions. Given limited funds, which goods would be considered essential? Who was going to make the tortillas? And how would people form romantic relationships? And which sexual relationships would be considered legitimate? So I want to tell you the story about menstruation. The women that I spoke to, I asked them, what was the hardest thing about being a guerrillera during the war? And I thought they were going to tell me about state violence. And they said it was bleeding through your uniform because you did not know if you had been shot or if you're just bleeding. So Mirna told me the story when she was 16. She thought it was very unjust that the women did not have sanitary napkins, but the men had cigarettes, which was a luxury good in the camps. So she organized the women and said, we are combatants. We need sanitary napkins. This is an essential good. This is not a luxury. We're tired of taking socks and putting them into a ball to capture our blood. We deserve more than that. And some of the men saw the women as dirty when they would wash their clothes. And other men were respectful and understanding, saying, compañera, there's nothing wrong with you. This is normal. So Mirna organized with other women and pushed the commander in Chalatenango to import sanitary napkins. And the struggle went beyond the guerrilla territories. Guerrilleras coordinated with feminists in Europe, in the United States, to start importing sanitary napkins as part of an international solidarity campaign. And I saw this in the advertisements, the literature of the period. So the existence of this campaign shows us how seriously women took the issue of menstruation, how they pressured men within the FMLN to meet their bodily needs, that a guerrillera bleeds from multiple sources, from bullets and from her monthly cycle. And we can go to the next slide. So I want to now give you an example of how campesina civilian women confronted sexism. Women campesinas intervened to be able to participate in the revolutionary bodies that were in the guerrilla territories. So as a reminder, the majority of civilians in the guerrilla territories were women, especially older women, women with young children and elderly people. Many of these women had lost their male relatives to state violence because men usually had very limited options. They could join the FMLN, they would be forcibly recruited by the government military, or they could flee. So this meant that it was women who were primarily responsible for keeping their families alive. And in a context where napalm was being dropped on them and where their children were targets of war. So campesina civilians had to organize. And as early as 1981, they began building what they called poderes populares locales, popular local power. These were councils where ordinary civilians would come together to build schools, to build clinics, to implement agrarian reform, to build childcare centers. And these councils addressed the immediate needs of the population, but they were also spaces for political education and collective decision-making. And one young organizer in 1983 said this: the councils are the seeds of the new society. The councils in Chalatenango supervised or coordinated the needs of about 30,000 people. So there would be a small village, that would be a council. They would be connected to a municipality. The municipalities connected to multiple municipalities, and then those municipalities connected to the larger department. And this was part of the political vision that women were building. We not only have to fight, yes, against the dictatorship, but we need to build a vision of what our new society will look like, one in which power rests in the hands of campesino people, a vision that was anti-capitalist, in that there would be no more exploitation of campesinos, and also one that was against a state bureaucracy that alienated people from decision-making. We can go to the next photo. This is a beautiful image from 1984 of a popular local power meeting. And as you can see, this is what a revolution looks like. Women, elderly folks, and children, so many children. And I always show this photo to my students because if we're told about revolutionary history at all, we're told about men with beards. But these are revolutionaries. We're the ones doing the work of trying to build a new society. We can go to the next slide. This is an image of the popular clinics. As many of you know, campesinos first learned to read and write, many of them in the guerrilla territories. And despite the bombs being dropped, there was a commitment that we have a right to read and to write and to educate ourselves and to understand the world around us. And the popular education experiments in El Salvador are some of the most inspiring models. We can go to the next slide. So I want to tell you the history of an organization that has been really written out of the history books and of the narratives that we tell. So the Asociación de Mujeres del Salvador, or the Association of Salvadoran Women, played a critical role in the building of that new society. AMES was the biggest women's organization linked to the FMLN, to the insurgency. And the president of AMES then became the first president of that revolutionary council government that I talked to you about. AMES organized women to make sure that they participated in the councils, to tackle the issues that directly impacted women. So for example, they pressured the clinics to start addressing women's reproductive health, which was a very taboo subject. And as good organizers, women like Ana Elsie, who was an organizer in Chalatenango, took on projects that reflected the needs of the base. So they created childcare centers to keep children alive, to give them different values, but also as a way of collectivizing domestic labor so that women could participate in the revolutionary process. And in 1983, a young organizer explained how she sought to, quote, develop the political consciousness of women and help them to understand their double oppression. We can go to the next slide. And this process of organizing begins to shift the meaning of what is a revolution. And we can see here the words of Leti, who said, people have a better understanding of what carrying out a revolution involves. The traditional view that the man works and provides for his family, while the woman stays with the children, not participating in society or politics, is changing. Today in the battle zones, women may go about their duties while men take care of the children. So that was a political vision that had to be won, that women have a right to participate in the class struggle, but that fighting sexism and patriarchy is part of the revolution too. So we can go to the next slide. I've mainly talked about the making of revolutionary feminism in El Salvador, but it also had transnational connections to the Americas. We have to remember that the period of the 1970s and 80s in all of Latin America, there was an upsurge of revolutionary movements. And in places like Chile, in Brazil, Nicaragua, women are not only fighting the dictatorship, but they're reflecting about sexism internally to their movement and how it's holding the movement back. So there was a woman, Maria Candelaria Navas, who participated in Andes, the teachers' union. Then she has to go to Mexico City to flee. And there she meets revolutionary women from Chile, from El MIR, from the Movimiento Izquierda Revolucionario. And they start talking about their shared experiences. And there's developing a hemispheric vision of feminism that is against imperialism, but is also against patriarchy. So we can go to the next slide. And AMES, the Association of Salvadoran Women, produces this beautiful text in 1981, where it really summarizes their political vision. They said, we seek the liberation of our countries from imperialism, dictatorship, and the local bourgeoisie. Although we work simultaneously around the question of the specific condition of women and our oppression within the capitalist and patriarchal system, it is necessary to point out that we women are a group defined by our own conditions and specific demands. So what does that mean? And who are they addressing? AMES is leading a double fight, a fight against imperialism and state violence, but also a fight internally to the movement to confront sexism. So they're talking to what we would call liberal feminists, not liberal as in progressive, but I mean liberal in the historic sense of people who did not question capitalism. So AMES is questioning a vision of feminism that wants to incorporate women into the capitalist structure. And they said that's not liberation. It's not liberation for women to have the right to exploit other women, for other women to bomb other countries. And they provocatively ask, what does a campesina have in common with the wife of a dictator? And they are also talking to some of the more orthodox Marxists within the movement. So AMES is a Marxist feminist organization, but they're talking to some of the men who say, we'll worry about sexism once we win the war, once we win the revolution. So they're reformulating Marxism, which is a theory or a practice to understand how exploitation works, and they said no. Domestic labor, the work that women do, is essential for the maintenance of capitalism, because women are doing all the work that is possible for men to show up to their jobs. And those wages are not living wages, and they also don't take into account all the work that women do to clothe them, to feed them, to take care of them. Let me start to wrap up. I can maybe during Q&A give you some more stories of the exchanges, because AMES also worked in the United States, and they worked with feminists and lesbian feminists who were in solidarity with one another. So we can go to the next slide. Essentially, the reason why I'm so interested in this history is that when we center women and gender, we get a very different picture of what the revolution was about. We are told that revolution is only made by the top leaders, if we're told anything about revolutionary history. And what this history shows, is that women were indispensable for building the labor movement in El Salvador and for building the revolutionary movement that then in that moment took up arms. And they leave us with an incredible legacy of revolutionary feminism, especially one that we need to consider in this country, where we're told that feminism is the right of women to bomb other countries. And we need a revolutionary feminism that can confront multiple forms of exploitation. So I want to leave you all with that question. What could a revolutionary feminism look like in 2023 for the 21st century? One that is able to confront multiple systems of oppression and that really centers the liberation of women and children. So I hope that this legacy can guide us in fighting for a new society where all people can live dignified lives within and outside the borders of the United States. Thank you. Oh, I have the archive of this organization digitized, and I'm curious if any of you participated with AMES or want to read the documents. I'll send you all of the materials. Thank you. Should I sit back down or should I? Okay, I'll sit back.
No, thank you. I'm just gonna sit because I think this makes it easier. Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Diana, for that plática, for that talk. And next, moving forward with our program, we will hear from two local women who are continuing that fight. First is Irma Flores, who is an immigrant, a community organizer, and community engagement specialist with 18 years of history advocating for immigrants and minorities in government and school systems, supporting them as they integrate into their new communities. And it's my pleasure to also say she's a colleague of mine. Welcome, Irma. Bienvenidos.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you. So I want to start with this quote. Women have always been the backbone of social movement. Angela Davis. Okay, sure. Women have always been the backbone of social justice movement. Angela Davis. Thank you. Good evening. How are you today? Thank you, Diana. That was so beautiful. You move a lot from me. I was thinking 1984, I just graduated from high school, and I faced a lot of from the civil war in El Salvador as a student, as a daughter. So it was, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and I'm very thankful for this opportunity. Thank you to Cambridge Sister Cities, and I'm happy to share my experience as an immigrant, and I'm so honored to be with Diana and Gabriela as well. My name is Irma Flores. I'm an immigrant, a woman of color, a member of the Massachusetts Network for Democracy in El Salvador. As you know, migration, I'm sorry, I can see. As you know, migration reflects the inequalities in our country. And until we resolve that, Salvadoran and Central American women see the need to migrate as the only option to survive and support their families. So my perspective is, as an immigrant, what we face in this country when we migrate to this country. Salvadorian women migrate due to insecurity and few opportunities. The women's situations in El Salvador is facing setbacks. It is urgent to reactivate Salvadorian institutions to avoid the exclusion of people, since the causes are multiple, including economic conditions and gender violence. And Diana talked about that. Currently, with the state of exception regime, it also left boys and girls abandoned due to the arrest of their parents and relatives, and all the responsibility falls on the women of our families. The advance we made with the strengthening of institutions such as DEMO, Ciudad Mujer, and law enforcement agencies against the women's violence have pretty much disappeared. In addition, the violence against women continues, although apparently the numbers have dropped in feminicides. However, structural violence, such inequality of opportunities of all kinds, remains and has even increased. The current government does not give priority to improve the situation of women. Let's reflect a little bit on the migrant trail. There are 3 stages of migration process: departure, transit, and arrival, with the aim showing how violence is with each other. In all of them, the life of many women are marked by the different experience of violence, both in the communities from which they come and the places of arrival. There are a lot of trauma. When we got here, we found that there is no better condition, or they are relatively better. Contrary to popular belief, the life conditions are not the best for immigrant women here in Massachusetts. A cultural shock. Self-esteem is affected. The lack of knowledge of government at all levels, school, health, municipality, etc. Lack of jobs opportunity or low employment pay rates. No health insurance, food insecurity, lack of dignified housing. We need to have 2 or 3 jobs to provide for our families here and send remittances to our families in El Salvador. Working at home without salary, taking care of children. Latino women are the less protected in labor force work in Massachusetts. We need to work 3 times more to be noticed in our workplace, to be recognized. We don't have the same professional opportunities. For more details, I invite you to take a look at the report titled Latinas in the Labor Market, produced by the Gaston Institute at UMass Boston in September 2022. Wage theft, sexual harassment, sexism, workplace harassment, domestic violence, discrimination, and racism. So most of the same issues we decide to migrate. In El Salvador, as well here, immigrant women are the fundamental piece of our economic model, yet we remain the least protected and benefited. In the absence of changes to the root causes of immigration, we are re-victimizing people. As a community, it is imperative that we take self-conscious that we are, and we have been, and we will be always in resistance, organizing until we address the social disparities in our countries and here in the United States. Thank you. You know what?
How are we doing? I'm about to do that. Hey. I'd like everyone to be thinking about questions that you'd like to ask. And if our members in the chat would put your questions in the chat, on Zoom rather, put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer questions from both sources. There's a lot to think about here. So this section of the program is designed to get us thinking about what we can be building here as women, especially as Salvadorans and allies of Salvadorans. Things in the country, as many people know, are devastatingly bad. The president has arrested over 60,000 people, swept up folks, denied our sister city tax revenue that they had been getting, so that they are having to close down many of the social programs that they have built up over the years. Much of what you heard from Diana is being destroyed. So it's our job as folks here to be learning and thinking about how we rebuild the kind of feminist organizing that many of us have been part of historically, and many of the younger people are starting to build themselves. So it's my pleasure to introduce another local organizing woman. Gabriela Cartagena is a Boston-born and raised Salvadoran Honduran narrative shifter, community organizer, and educator who dedicates a lot of her work and her art's inspiration to housing justice and immigration liberation efforts. Many of you know of her work with City Life Vida Urbana. Gabriela. And while Gabi is coming up, I'd just like to mention that we have the honor of hosting Jose Aleman, our former, why do I keep forgetting that phrase? Our former Consul General from El Salvador to New England. So we're delighted to have him here on Zoom. So,
thank you.
Both of them. You can flip it if you want to.
Sweet, thank you. Hey everyone. Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, sounds like it. Hi everyone. My name is Gabriela, as you heard. I was born and raised here in Boston. My family is of Salvadoran Hondureño descent. So I'm like what they call the detention baby. It's like an internal joke. So if you get it, you get it. If you don't, then do some history. Yeah, similar to our opener, I'm very proud to be a first generation, lot of things, right? As someone who was born and raised in Boston with parents who came from El Salvador, I had my parents made sure that I, was able to get an education, that they sacrificed everything they could for me to graduate from college, to pay for college, now to buy a home. So I'm stably housed. And for those who, I wasn't really prepared to do speech. I was under impression this is going to be a little different. So what I'm going to do is kind of just talk about a little bit of the organizing work I do here in Boston, and also share a little bit about kind of like my personal journey with reconnecting with my Central American culture and heritage and history. Growing up in Boston, going to Boston public schools, being in the US education system, no immigrant descent, brown or Black child is going to learn about the history of their family roots, right? The only immigrant history we learn in school is about Ellis Island. And I'm sorry, but I have no relationship to that, so it's not really a history that I really care about. And I would say like parts of the history books that actually touch on, I guess, resistance or movement work has always been it's been a paragraph dedicated to, it's just been a paragraph dedicated to the civil rights movement, which is amazing, but also just not enough even for like the Black African history of this country, right? That the US has had, right, centuries of just exploitation behind, right, around indigeneity, around slavery. And in regards to Central America, I never was really able to learn this history unless like, and even for my parents, like it's hard for my parents to talk about the past. I'm not gonna like ask them questions about, what was the war like, out of nowhere. That's traumatizing, that's triggering. We've had our moments. It's more so like when my parents are congregated with their family members, with their cousins, with their siblings, where they reflect on, oh, remember when we had to be on that trunk car going to the US for hours? Oh, remember when we had to crawl through that sewage to cross the border? Oh, you remember when you almost drowned, like crossing the border, like nonchalant? Those would be the moments when I was able to hear about my family's like immigration journey. But my mom, she was deported twice. My dad once, but they're now US citizens after like 18 years of waiting for their documentation process to go through, which is quick compared to like what we see nowadays, right? Within the immigration process, people who are undocumented, trying to get their working permit and or residency and later US citizenship. That process has become more expensive over the years, right? As a barrier of entry, right? A systemic barrier of entry to be able to exercise your power to vote. I would say ever since my parents became citizens, they've voted every single election that could be. I'm proud to say that I come from the neighborhood East Boston that had the majority votes for Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, Biden won Massachusetts and Trump won Massachusetts, right? Let's not forget, Massachusetts has a long history of racism. And just to tell you a little bit about, I guess, like learning more about Central American history and El Salvador and Honduras specifically, I've only really had the opportunity to enrich in my historical learnings, like being in the country itself. Like being there, talking to my cousins, talking to family, visiting museums, right? Surprisingly, believe it or not, if you are in El Salvador and want to go to an indigenous museum, there's only one, right? And that's in the town of Nahuizalco. I recommend you all, please go there, support that indigenous museum. It has an amazing history of the massacres that happened, the many massacres that happened in El Salvador that wiped out a large population, a majority of the population of the indigenous community there. As of recently, I remember right before the pandemic, I signed up to do a delegation with Sister Cities. I was never able to because the pandemic happened, but I did have the opportunity to do a delegation with Share Foundation, which is based in Berkeley, California, and led by Salvadoran himself, Salvadoran refugee Jose Artiga. Yesterday, we hosted a conversation with, it was a part of a national water defender tour with Honduran water defenders. We hosted a anti-imperialist conversation yesterday, and went on Wednesday in East Boston, with the historical radio stations of Radio Progreso of Honduras and Radio Eric. I just think it's, this delegation work is beautiful. And I want us as a collective to really start thinking about how do we get more children of the people who've been forcefully displaced from Central America to join these delegations, right? There's a lot of youth out there, a lot of young adults, and even grown adults who haven't had the opportunity to go back because it's too expensive. They don't have anyone to go back to because everyone has already immigrated, or like they just don't feel like it's safe enough because they're still consuming this like mass propaganda that we're receiving here that El Salvador isn't safe enough, or it's safe enough now because there's cops everywhere and military and army everywhere. But, history has shown us that people don't necessarily feel the safest with police and militia near us. Definitely like think about your money, donate, and sponsor Central American people to go back to their countries. And I think that's really important because, being in the United States, families who are forced to assimilate, right, because they're either bullied because they don't speak English good enough, or they're bullied because they're not wearing like the new things, right? I think it's really important, people are forced to try to fit in this white supremacist culture, right, that makes it embarrassing to want to speak your native language in public, right? That makes it embarrassing to bring your traditional foods into school, right? For you to heat up. Like, why is it shameful for children to bring their home food into school, right? That's because of this white supremacist culture that we have assimilated to, that we are assimilating to, that we're being forced to assimilate to, but at the same time that I hope everyone in this room is also actively resisting. And just a little bit about my organizing background. I started, I would say, to formally organize here in Massachusetts to legalize cannabis. It's legal now, hey. I would say what really drew my attention to legalizing cannabis was seeing the repercussions of of my classmates when I was in high school, like being expelled, being sent to jail over the possession of a plant, right? It's not even like they were selling or anything, and even if they were, like, it's not like you're violently like stabbing someone in the heart, right? That's we're talking about different offenses here, and that's where I started organizing. And I guess kind of like what changed my trajectory in organizing was when I learned that at that time, 2016, I believe, At that time, I learned that the majority of deportations of the moment were people who were found with possession of marijuana, right? Those were the largest, at that moment, the percentage of people being deported out of the United States. And that's when I kind of like shift my organizing into immigrant rights organizing, particularly with Movimiento Cosecha movement, which is a national decentralized immigrant rights movement fighting for the respect, dignity, and permanent protection of all immigrants and prioritizing the leadership of undocumented leaders. And, you know, kind of like the ultimate goal within Cosecha movement is organizing to get to the point of a national boycott, what we call la huelga nacional, right? Because the ultimate power that we have as working class people, right, undocumented or documented, citizen or not, is our labor, right? So imagine if everyone didn't work one day, how chaotic the city would be, right? Imagine if we didn't work a week. Imagine if we didn't work a month, right? Just imagine the amount of negotiating power we can get as working class people, you know, collectively organizing towards something, you know? And with Cosecha movement, Movimiento Cosecha, our focus at the beginning was against the family separation policy that like Trump announced of that time. It's like when putting kids in cages, you know, really hit like front page media. And later the focus was on driver's licenses, getting driver's licenses for all here in Massachusetts, which was a 18-year plus fight. And as soon as it got voted in, guess what? These crazy immigrant haters, I didn't even know this was legal. They put out a ballot to rescind the driver's license win, right? So that just tells us a lot about the power white supremacists have in the state house here in Massachusetts, in our home state. Which, so I just wanted to uplift that, and I would say like through my immigrant rights organizing, I got connected to the housing justice movement. East Boston, in the scope of the city of Boston, was and is probably the epicenter of evictions, right? Evictions right now across, and foreclosures. The housing crisis in Massachusetts has existed for decades, but it's just gotten worse, right, over time, and has gone real bad, right, ever since the pandemic hit. Right now in the city of Boston, actually, let me do the statewide scope. Across the state of Massachusetts, you are twice more likely to be evicted. You're twice more likely to be evicted if you are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. In the city of Boston, you're 70% more likely to be evicted, right? If you are a Black, Indigenous, person of color, right? I just want to say that aloud as a way to uplift that racial justice is housing justice, right? Immigration justice is housing justice. And one of the fights we're pushing for here in the state of Massachusetts is the push for lifting the ban on rent control. Right now, we're fighting to lift the ban on rent control. We're fighting to push a foreclosure prevention bill as well, because many homeowners are also at risk of losing their homes. And guess who's more at risk of losing their homes, right? The same people who are at risk of being evicted. And I just want to share with you all, if you're interested or want to get involved with this fight against the housing crisis, for rent control, for foreclosure prevention, talk to me, get connected to City Life Vida Urbana. On Thursday, June 1st, there's going to be a statewide lobbying day, right, at the State House, pushing those two bills as part of a statewide coalition called Homes for All Massachusetts. And I heard there's folks from Springfield here. We're trying, Springfield's coming out. Springfield, no one leaves. You're really trying to push this statewide. So if you have connections in other districts, please talk to me, because we're at the place where we're trying to invite as many organizations and coordinate buses for towns who are far from Boston. Thank you so much. And thank you so much. I hope you all have a great evening.
Yeah, I got one.
We're having one of those technical moments. We're changing the battery in the camera. But so far, so good, actually. Thank you, Gabriella. And if people would start to think about your questions. Kath, we didn't think about this, about if we move the microphone around, the camera won't go, nor will this microphone go. But maybe what we'll do.
I'll probably stay here with the camera and.
While we're pausing, we might be able to take this camera and then repeat the questions. Or people can. You can come up. Bring the mic around. So it's this one. How many people already have a comment or a question? Just get a sense. Comment, questions, appreciation. Because we're going to have you probably come up there to ask questions. So don't get intimidated.
We have questioners come up here.
Are we ready? Are you set? Well, yes. And Rachel, do we have any questions in the chat? There's a couple of comments, but you, we're bringing you a mic, and we'll see because she can speak.
This work, yeah, that's okay.
The suggestion is also, Irma, Diana, and Gabriella, if you would come up and just be here, that would be great. Just ask around a little mic.
Okay, I'd like to share the comment from Marta Benavides, who is an incredible woman that we met in El Salvador about 10 years ago. I can't remember which delegation it was. She had to leave. She said, "Saludos, I will have to leave for a meeting, a previous commitment. But we need to make sure we reach out to the Salvadoran diaspora and to other Central Americans, South Americans, and Caribbeans as well. There is a major campaign from the present administration of the government of our country in the US to reach out to our compatriots, to press for their support in general, and the upcoming presidential, legislative, and municipal elections for 2024. There are visits from leaders from our legislation to many immigrant communities, especially Salvadoran, and also a call to get rid of members of US legislative at any level that do not support the administration of the government of our country. We need to inform and educate the people of our diasporas and US people as well. The administration of the government is spending millions of US dollars of our national budget to create and distribute videos in Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. 110 per day for that purpose. And this is more than 30,000 per month, plus more in regular media. Fox in the US carries a lot. So does Twitter. You will, Martha. So as we know, the Salvadoran government is using social media constantly to put out their perspective. And then Valerie Bonds, who's also on Zoom, said the US history is important for all immigrants, even though much of our diverse ethnic US history is omitted. I believe our educational institutions, curriculums should include the history of all who live in the United States.
So questions from the room? Any comments or thoughts about what you've heard tonight? I guess it all just.
Se pueden hacer preguntas en español también. Go ahead, Flor.
Me parece muy bien felicitar la intervención de la compañera que ha hecho el libro, como que está estructurando un libro de rescate sobre la historia de El Salvador, sobre el movimiento de mujeres de El Salvador. ¿Quiere que pase para él?
I'm looking to the interpreter behind you.
Solo invitaría a ella, digamos, para que esa es una parte de la historia del movimiento de mujeres de El Salvador. ¿Verdad? Y está muy bien, muy buena, excelente.
Momentito. Interpreter.
And language justice also is for her to finish her phrase.
Oh, thanks.
I just want to say it's not coming through on us.
Okay, we can't do it there. Yeah.
Compañía, si quieres hacer una pregunta, comentario. No quiere, perdón. Siéntense acá, no tenga pena. Es para que lo escuchen en la computadora.
Flor, pase.
Sí, que pena.
Gracias.
Bueno,
va a ser corta. No, yo creo que una parte de la historia muy interesante, pero falta la otra parte de la historia, que es la parte de los años 85, 86, 87, de la historia del movimiento de mujeres de El Salvador. Esa parte es una parte muy heroica, porque es la parte que quizá enfrentó con mayor énfasis el machismo dentro de la revolución, ¿verdad? Y que lo sigue enfrentando en estos momentos. Yo creo que el movimiento social de El Salvador no sería igual si no estuviéramos las mujeres allá involucradas. Yo conocí el surgimiento de dos organizaciones de mujeres, CONAMUS, se llama una, y la otra es la Asociación de Mujeres de El Salvador, AMS, que por cuestiones de las pandillas se tuvo que cambiar las siglas, hoy se llama AMS, porque se confundía con una de las pandillas, con la sigla de una de las pandillas, y le dio muchos problemas. Entonces, esa parte yo sí invitaría. Candelaria Navas, sí, yo conozco a Candelaria, ha trabajado bastante en esa parte, pero quizá falta profundizar los problemas ciertos del movimiento, del surgimiento del movimiento actual del Salvador, del movimiento de mujeres del Salvador solamente.
Just rely on reaching this thing twice. And with the street.
So I wanted to thank you for the presentation. As far as the woman who has a book that she was working on the history of women in El Salvador, their revolutionary role, I really wanted to congratulate their project. It sounded really good. The only thing that I would like to add is that it would be nice to see a little bit more of the time period of 85, 86, 87. Women in El Salvador at that time had a really heroic fundamental role that's really important to emphasize. And, you know, especially within the revolution and dealing with big challenges with machismo that they had to deal with at that point. So I think that's very important. And that I wanted, you know, I have some contact with some of the organizations that were mentioned. One of them ended up having to change their name actually because they were getting mixed up with one of the gangs that's El Salvador. The letters were similar, so they ended up changing its name, but they had some problems because of that. But I'm familiar with them, and the woman Candelaria, that they changed it to Ames. And I'm familiar with Candelaria Navas. I've met her before. And then I also wanted to say it would be good to have a little bit more about the role of women in El Salvador today. Have the situation right now, they're having a very important role now as well. But thank you very much.
Respond to that? Respond to that?
Compañera Flor. Sí, muchísimas gracias por sus comentarios. Creo que es una parte de la historia muy importante. Hay tanta historia que aún falta por escribir. Los documentos de CONAMUS que yo he encontrado han sido pocos y tal vez si usted o otras compañeras tienen documentos en la casa, podemos hacer un esfuerzo para digitalizarlos, porque yo solamente hablé de una sola organización, pero falta, como usted dice, hablar sobre la historia de AMS, de CONAMUS, las 4 otras organizaciones que estaban vinculadas con el frente, la situación actual. Este proyecto es un pequeño aporte de un granito de arena, pero sí, creo que sí, me encantaría conversar más con usted para poder captar sus experiencias y si tienen documentos, que hagamos ese esfuerzo colectivo para preservar la memoria histórica de la Organización de las Mujeres. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por su comentario. I can say it in English. Yeah, of course. I was saying that I completely agree with her comments, that there is still such a history to be written. I only spoke to you today about one women's organization, but there were 4 other women's organizations linked to the FMLN and multiple organizations that then arose in the early 90s as a result of the political opening with the peace process. So if you participated in these organizations, if you have documents, let's work together to digitize those documents so that these histories can be written. Because I've been able to write the history of AMES because of the documents that I have found. And these documents are literally still being unearthed. A campesino man 5 years ago found an archive of La Comandanta Shana. And this is where I was able to find more of those documents. So that's the how precious this history is. So if you have these materials, let's talk. If you want to do interviews, let's talk. I'll translate that part to Spanish too. Que esta historia todavía falta por escribirse. Hace 5 años, un campesino encontró un archivo que estaba enterrado en la tierra, el archivo de la comandante Shana, donde se encontraban los documentos de las PPL, de la Organización de las Mujeres. Entonces, como esa es la fragilidad de esta historia, que aún falta por escribir, porque literalmente la estamos sacando de la tierra.
Yes. Should we give you? I can bring the microphone over there. We'll go there.
It's not a question, it's a comment about the actual situation in Santa Marta, speaking to the role of women, probably the stronger voice and more consistent voice in the community, the defense of the 5 water defenders that are in jail since January, is Vidalina Morales, who is a leader in the community. If you listen to any of the Zoom talks or any, I mean, she's out there, she's amazing. And not only her, but people that I know from the community who are now visiting in Washington. And a lot of them are women, not to forget Peter, who is a man, there's nothing wrong with that. But I just wanted to say that, we're not only talking about the Civil War, we're not talking about the 80s, we're talking about nowadays, the women are out there every day in a community like Santa Marta. And that's why the community of Santa Marta is so important, because there's a whole movement from, and I think a lot of women learn, started to play their role during the Civil War, and they continue to do so because it's not over. Thank you.
Okay.
Rachel, you have a.
Okay, this is a question from Alisa Ebel. What would the speakers say are priorities for advocacy at state and federal level? I heard housing justice and decriminalization of marijuana. Are there others? And then the second part is, have you seen other good examples of how to raise up the history of Salvadoran immigrants' experiences, especially those of women in local communities, other than this event, which has been great? Thank you.
So marijuana is already legal in Massachusetts, so that's not a fight right now, right? What I was saying is, to me, a legislative priority in the state of Massachusetts is lifting the ban on rent control and passing a new, lifting the ban on rent control and putting a 5% max cap for rent increases. That's one. Two, the foreclosure prevention bill, right? So lifting the ban on rent control with a 5% max cap and a foreclosure prevention bill, right? Because many homeowners don't really own their home because the bank still owns it. So those are the two legislative priorities for housing, which in my books is one of the biggest crises here in the state of Massachusetts. And if you did not know, a majority of the state legislators are landlords themselves, right? So think about it. And we need you all to call your legislators, email them, tell them to co-sponsor lifting the ban on rent control with a 5% max cap and co-sponsoring the foreclosure prevention bill. There are online tools you can use on the homesforallmass.org website, homesforallmass.org/ACT. And if you want to come out in person, June 1st, 10 a.m. outside the State House. Well, we'll be inside. But if you want more information, just follow or sign up to the action alert emails with City Life Vida Urbana. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. We have a website and there's an email sign up there.
For the second part of that question, I think that immigration, I will try. Okay. For the second part of the question, I think immigration is a systematic. So we have to start talking about the system. Is the system the one who is allowing this victimization of especially women and migrants? So, municipalities play a big role in this, the community as well. So in Somerville, I'm not wearing the Somerville hat now, but in Somerville, we create this program for immigrants, and we provide services and trying to support them. But it has to be something sustainable at the same time, because right now I think it's more services, and we need change the system. We need something sustainable. And I think as a community as well, we can participate actively and motivate the immigrants to be part as well. We have to open the doors, because what I'm seeing in many agencies is now is more bureaucracy, and we are closing the doors for immigrants, and that cannot be happening. So that's why, and I totally understand the paternalism. I am the good, I'm providing you food. We don't want that. we want to help as an immigrant. We want to help the tools for be myself, right? So I think, please don't be that institution that providing everything for the families. What we want is the tools to become integrate in this community. I hope that will answer the question.
Sorry, I just want to put a plug for the speakers on the panel if they could just speak into the mic. I'm sorry.
No, it's not working anymore.
It ran out of battery.
Can't use that one. So just hold the mic right up there. So I think there's two more comments in the chat,
And then we'll shift over to.
yeah, my question. Yeah.
Should I ask it?
There's one mic that's very loud. That would be that one. Okay. So we have two quick comments in here too, and then we're gonna hear from.
Well, my question is to the end. How's the experience been documenting and archiving all this history? You know, I know that can be really powerful, or you know, intergenerational trauma exists. So how has that been for you as like a researcher, as kind of like a bridge of histories, as an interpreter? How's that been?
Thanks for asking that question. I see history as a tool to build revolutionary hope and as a tool for healing. And the violence of one of the forms of violence of imperialism is to create a rupture from people's history. To not know why your own family was displaced. To not know the revolutionary legacy that you are a part of. And so that desire to reconnect to Latin America stemmed from my own experiences being undocumented and wanting to understand why I grew up on Long Island, why white kids in the next high school killed migrants for sport. So it came from a place of deep pain. And I've been pulling on that thread ever since. And in 2013, I began working with the Museo de la Palabra y la Imagen, which was co-founded by Carlos Enriquez Gonsalve, who was the broadcaster of the Radio BECERRA. And that museum connected me to all of these campesina women, and their stories changed my life. It was the most sacred moment to be with them in their kitchens. I look young, and I was way younger than when I was doing the interviews, and they would be surprised of like, you could be like my granddaughter. So it was very emotional, a lot of laughter, a lot of tears, and I sob all the time. I see this as a spiritual practice in the most humble way, because it's just, again, a drop of water in the bucket of how can we give the dead a proper burial. And these people died for a political vision. The magnitude of state violence in the 80s, just in that decade alone, at least 300,000 people were murdered in Central America. But we have to ask ourselves why. And the scale of state violence was to crush the threat of a revolutionary movement. And to understand what these people were fighting for, that was a viable alternative. And now we're at a moment where it's easier to imagine the end of the planet and of life itself, rather than to imagine the end of capitalism. So I see this as a spiritual practice, and I was telling you, I forget who I was telling before, but with Domitila, that archive that I told you about of the Comandante Shana that was just found 5 years ago, I was reading through it. It's like 2,000 documents. I was very sleepy, like scrolling, reading all these handwritten notes. And then I see a letter of a woman named Carmen talking about her difficult pregnancy and how she's at risk of miscarrying because she's running pregnant, holding her baby, like her pregnant belly. And I take a photo of it and I send it to Domitila. And I said, just by any chance, is this you? And she's like, yes, that's my handwriting. And Domitila went through hell to give birth to that first daughter. Her partner died. She gave the baby to her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law didn't want to give the baby back, told her that her mother had abandoned her. And Domitila is still repairing that relationship with her daughter. So I see this history as, at most, I'm just an interpreter. Obviously, I have an analysis of the history. I'm not neutral, and historians are not neutral. Whoever tells you this is bullshitting you. But I am transparent about the questions I ask, the evidence I present. And it's very deeply emotional, and I have to take care of myself in the process, and it's a spiritual practice. But I see it as a building of an altar. And I also think that I can do this work in part because I'm Colombian. And I was wanting to do this history in Colombia, but my own trauma in Colombia, I couldn't get past it. That pain of that rupture. And so I have been building a relationship with the MUPI and with these communities for now the past 10 years. And I feel that work has now allowed me to heal in a way where I can now also begin to turn my attention to the impacts of counterinsurgency and of women's organizing in Colombia, but it took a long time for me to get here. So I love El Salvador, and it's very deep in my heart, but I'm hoping that it's a very small, humble contribution, but that it can provide some healing. That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
So I don't think much more can be said at this point, but it's a perfect segue to the one last piece of our program tonight, witnessing, carrying history, witnessing history. That's what our delegations have been about, helping, supporting the community of San Jose Las Flores and the people of El Salvador to hang on to their powerful history, pass it to their children, and we are witnesses to that. We've been witnesses for 37 plus years, and so our most recent delegation has just returned, and I'd like to invite Ellie Cordero, who is a member of that delegation, to come up and just tell us a little bit about that. And while you're listening to Ellie and thinking about it, actually, I think it was Gabriella who mentioned that our money can be a very powerful piece of our solidarity. So we have a little basket outside, and if you feel moved to give a donation, that's fabulous. Or in your program, there's a way that you can send a check to Cambridge, El Salvador, Sister Cities. But that's what enables us to help people travel to El Salvador and witness the people in action. So take it away, Ellie. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Why don't you take your mask? Take your mask off? Just for the
Okay. Okay. Is that better? Okay. So, hello, buenos dias. Oh, that's not. Tardes.
That'd be super cool.
All
Just
right.
because of the Zoom
Let me
folks.
just take this off. So my name is Ellie Cordero. I am Salvadoran American and Mexican American as well. Yeah, so this was my second delegation to El Salvador. And the first one was in 2019, right before the pandemic. I was on a popular education workshop. And so, I don't know, still processing the trip. And yeah, so a lot like what Gabby said, growing up Salvadoran or, you know, Central American family, you don't hear about your history. You don't, you know, you don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. Family doesn't talk about it because it's too painful, too triggering, and all of that. So growing up, it was very difficult for me to wrap my head around. I had questions all the time. And I also didn't have a relationship with my grandparents for about 12 years or so. So there was a lot of disconnect from my history. And so in undergrad, I got introduced to sister cities. And yeah, so in El Salvador, in San Jose de las Flores, we met with different groups of elders, educators, and youth, and got to talk about, you know, the past, the history, and essentially the current political state. And this trip really helped sort of create a narrative of, you know, my history, my family's history. My mom came here from San Vicente when she was 6 years old. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to, I also get very nervous in front of crowds and stuff. Yeah, so this trip really helped sort of string together all of the different pieces of information that I grew up getting, and also filled in a lot that I don't have. And so I'm continuously learning the history, and being there, Gabby touched on this, you don't really, it's very different to learn about it here and then go there and experience it. And so coming back home, and even while I was over there sending, you know, pictures and text messages to my mom and her sisters about, you know, what I'm learning and the truth about the history of the people that, you know, we're visiting. They kept saying like, wow, we didn't, like, we're learning so much about our history through you. And even my therapist said that too. But I think one of the biggest things just that I took away from this trip was understanding well, not even understanding, but just the complexity of the past, and how things are today. My mom's eldest sister, who lives over there still, I got to see her for a moment over there, and it was very interesting because she and her husband are both colonels, generals, whatever, of the military. And so hearing the stories that I had heard all week and how people deny the truth of the history of, you know, of the different communities that we visited, was very tough. So yeah, just got to experience that sort of dichotomy firsthand, between, you know, from the past and how it's playing out in the future, or not the future, but in the present. Yes, so again, yeah, I think these trips, I mean, just starting, getting involved with sister cities was a bit challenging as a Salvadoran American, seeing, you know, a group of white people doing some sort of work and trying to understand what that was. So I think I came into this a little bit critical, and I'm always going to be critical because we have to be. And I was able to see how sistering plays out and what that relationship with Salvadorans and people from over here, what that relationship looks like. And it was great to see that. And my personal reflection with meeting the youth, I guess that's something that we talked about a bit, and how we can continue this relationship with San Jose Las Flores, because generations are, you know, we're moving up. So yeah, and it was just really nice to connect with the youth there, and we're in touch via social media because everyone's on social media. But yes, I just want to echo that this trip was super important to not only me, but also my family. And just the conversations that we've had. And just a little side note, like I gave a little slideshow presentation to my grandmother this morning. And it was just like, she really enjoyed it. So I think it's really important to continue to like sponsor people like me, other Salvadorans, to go on these trips, because it is life-changing and healing in some ways. So yeah.
Is there a report back?
There is a report back. Thank you, Kathy, so much for that question. So on the back of your program, there is a QR code, and you can scan it with your phone. If you open up your camera on your phone and hover over it, it should pop up. There should be a little link that pops up, and you can click on that and open it. So the other members of the delegation and I will be reporting back on the trip more than what I just did right now, on May 20th, Saturday, from 4 to 6:30 here. So yes, and I just wanted to also say thank you to all the Salvadorans here. Thank you to everyone who's helped put this together. Thank you to the women in the room. Thank you to my mother for coming for the first time. Well, no, because I invited her for the first time. But yes, thank you. Thank you.
Just
Okay, so I think we're gonna close it out. This was really amazing. This is just my personal reflection on this, just to be surrounded by powerful women. I just want to echo like 2, 3, 4 times exactly what Ellie and Gabby said. So I think moving forward, it's really important to support, you know, first gen Salvadoran American children of immigrants that would like to go on this trip. I think what they spoke to is really the Salvadorian diaspora, and silence has really been instilled in our families for years. And so thank you, Ellie, for talking to that. We just want to thank the interpreters, everybody who's here, everybody who's on Zoom, everybody who joined us this evening. I'm not sure where the food's from. I haven't had a chance to eat it, but I'm sure it's delicious. Maya Sol in Somerville. And so take some home with you, because I'm sure it's really, really good. And that's it. I think this was an amazing program, and thank you for spending your evening with us, and get home safe. Thank you.
Tenemos oficinas de. Hay guacamole también.